I don't think I have my screen on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Norwalk Public Library's first domestic violence crisis program. So I'd first like to thank, is it Tamara or Tamara?
Tamara.
So Tamara Pardo, Nikia
Yes.
Ellis, Suzanne Adam, and Ann Rodwell Lawton for all of their support. As everyone knows, we lost one of our dear employees, Divya Mizra, earlier, well, not earlier, but in May, to a domestic violence situation. And they were there to support us and to support staff if needed. So I would just like to take a few seconds of silence for Divya, if you don't mind. Thank you, everyone. So for those of you who don't know, the Domestic Violence Crisis Center advocates for individuals who are experiencing abuse in personal relationships. Their multiple service and professional staff help those experiencing abuse at any level, and they do it confidentially in a supportive environment. All victims, again, all services are free and again, confidential, and they're offered in multilingual and multicultural languages or cultures. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Ms. Rodwell Lawton.
Great, thank you so much. We are so excited to be here and so honored to be here with all of you, and really are looking forward to all of the conversations that we are going to have over the month together, as this is a 4-part workshop series, and we are just so honored to partner with the Norwalk Public Library. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce myself. Again, my name is Anne. I work at the Domestic Violence Crisis Center. I will be facilitating tonight with my colleague, Nikia Ellis. So I will hand it on over to her.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. And thank you all. Like Anne said, we really want this to be interactive. So feel free to either unmute yourself to ask any questions or to respond to any of our questions. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can type your answer in the chat box and we can read it out loud, or type your questions in the chat box and we can do that as well. But we're going to get started. So the first part of our 4-part series is called Relationship Checkup. And we will be discussing how we can build healthy relationships in the time of COVID. In week 2, we'll be discussing relationship red flags and talk about the different unhealthy behaviors that may crop up in a relationship. In week 3, on October 20th, we will be talking about the complexities of domestic violence, and why when people ask, why don't they just leave? Why it's really a kind of a loaded question, and there's a lot more behind it. So we're going to be unpacking all those barriers to victims leaving a relationship. And then finally, we will wrap up the month on October 27th and do a bystander intervention training, so we can empower all of you to have the tools if you hear or see anything that is either problematic or inappropriate, from just a statement to actual harmful behavior like physical violence, that you will feel equipped to intervene on behalf of the victim. So those are going to be the workshop topics for our series this month. And again, you can register using that link down below or scan the QR code, and they will start each Wednesday at 6 p.m. So a little bit more about DVCC before we get into it. Like Sherelle said, we offer free and confidential services for victims experiencing domestic violence, and it's our mission to help individuals on their journey to safety. So we offer a 24/7 Safe Connect hotline, and that's that 888 number that you see in the top right corner of your screen. We always encourage people to just jot it down or take a screenshot, because you never know who you may need to give it to. We also have emergency safe housing. So if any individual or family felt like it was no longer safe for them to remain in their home and they had no other options, we have safe houses located at undisclosed locations for them to stay while they figure their next steps out. We also offer a number of free counseling and advocacy programs, including free individual and group counseling for both children and adults, as well as legal assistance and financial advocates that can help with anything from obtaining restraining orders. We hold legal clinics to help with child custody and divorce. We have wonderful, wonderful financial advocates that can help find jobs, affordable housing, restore credit, open bank accounts. So we really just try to be a wraparound service for our clients. And then of course we have our educational program, which you all are a part of. So thank you again to the library for partnering with us to bring this free programming to the residents of Norwalk. So moving on now, I'll hand it back over to Anne.
Great, thanks, Nakia. So tonight we are talking about relationships and specifically around healthy relationships. And why this topic is so important is because if we want to really prevent unhealthy and abusive relationships, we have to start by having the conversation of what healthy relationships look like and what those skills are. These things don't often come naturally to us, right? So instead of telling people what not to do, we also need to tell people what behaviors we do want them to engage in. So when we're thinking about relationships, it's helpful to remember that we are talking about all different types of relationships. So at DVCC, we often focus on intimate partner relationships, but healthy relationship skills are really the same across any kind of relationship. So whether it's a family relationship, an intimate partner, a friend, a lot of these things are going to be applicable. And even in intimate partner relationships, we know that those can take many different forms too, right? So in intimate partner relationships, individuals can live separately or they can cohabitate, and that's going to change some of the dynamics. We'll talk about that a little bit. And we know that COVID has impacted almost every aspect of our life. So it's also going to have impacted our relationships. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what that might have looked like and how we can overcome some of the impact of COVID on our relationships. Regardless of the type of relationship, everyone deserves to have a healthy relationship and to have their healthy relationship encompass these healthy relationship skills and signs. Okay, so first we want to talk a little bit about some of the positives and negatives of COVID-19 on relationships. And these are going to be different depending on the type of relationship, right? So whether two people are living separately, maybe these are two friends or two people who are dating, or folks who are cohabitating. Maybe they're a family or maybe they are dating, maybe they're intimate partners. So this is going to be our first kind of interactive segment where you can type in the chat and Nakia will read your response. That's typically is the easiest, but you can also unmute yourself. So why don't we start with cohabitating? What do we think are some of the positives that came out of COVID around relationships for individuals who live together? Any thoughts? So the first one that comes to mind for me is just spending more time together, being able, not having to factor in a commute, not having all your extracurricular activities going on. It allows you to spend more time with the person maybe you're dating or living with. So that would be a positive. Nakia, do you have a positive?
Oh, yep, go ahead. Someone was just about to speak. No.
That I thought I heard someone too, but that's okay.
Oh, that's okay.
Here's some other positives, right? In spending more time together, lots of people have reported that they've grown closer to their partner, and they've also grown closer because they've had to navigate this public health crisis together. And in doing so, they were able to support each other, right? So that's positive. Another positive, some of my friends have talked about is like being able to share household tasks more, being home more often, and doing more things around the house equally. But then we have some negatives too. So negatives that impacted relationships are things like lack of independence, which we know is really important in a relationship. We're allowed to have our own friends, our own hobbies, our own things. And so not being able to leave the house as often to do those things felt like not having that independence. So that could be a negative. Some people also reported having more arguments, possibly due to the stress, right, that they were under, whether that was job-related stress, health-related stress. So we really saw that there were positives and negatives for people living together. And then for people who are living separately, a negative that it was difficult to see each other or to navigate the different risks that were associated with that relationship. And also just being lonely, right? And missing those connections, whether that's friendships or whether that's a romantic relationship. And some positives for folks who maybe weren't living together throughout COVID was maybe they had to be more intentional about scheduling their time to hang out, whether that was on FaceTime or going for a walk outside. So they were more intentional about that. And also being able to be in multiple places, right, because of Zoom. So many folks who have divorced families said actually COVID, a positive that came out of it is that I can Zoom into all these different family gatherings on the same day, right? I can be in many different places. So it's really helpful to recognize that there are positives and negatives. Some of these negatives we're going to focus on today and talking about how we can overcome some of those negative impacts of COVID that's had on relationships. So that's what we're going to hopefully leave today with.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So we want to start off by talking about what qualities you all value in a relationship before we share some of our own ideas of what qualities we think would be important for a relationship. But if anyone wants to type in the chat or just unmute yourself and just let us know a quality that you value. Okay, I see respect. Awesome, thank you.
Respect's a good one.
Trust, thank you. Yeah, trust is another one of those foundational kind of components to any healthy relationship. Great, do we have any more? We have respect, we have trust.
There's something that kind of usually goes hand in hand with trust.
Yeah, boundaries. Yes, boundaries are important. Respecting boundaries and setting boundaries. Thank you for that. I think for trust, I would also group that along with honesty, because I think that's how you really build a trustworthy relationship. Excellent. Anyone else before we move on to the next one? Okay, so thank you for your comments. We will break some of these down now and talk a little bit more in detail of what they look like, especially related to COVID. Okay, so these are some of the healthy elements that we would consider important for a relationship. This is not the full list. There are many others, but these are just a couple that we would like to highlight with you this evening. So we have boundaries, which someone mentioned in the chat, which are really important. And that's basically just like personal limits that we set with other people to let them know what we're comfortable and uncomfortable with. And we will cover that more. We'll get into a lot of detail with that a little bit later on in the workshop, along with healthy communication and how to have empathy in the relationship. But some additional ones that were mentioned in the chat were respect, right? mutual respect for one another, being open and accepting of one another, especially in the time of COVID. We know that we all reacted differently and dealt with the pandemic in different ways. So just respecting people and the way that they were dealing with this very difficult and stressful situation. And already mentioned independence, but being your own person within the relationship is still really important. I think sometimes as a society, we have this understanding that like you get into a relationship and then you feel complete. But it's really important that we are complete whole individuals, whether we're in a relationship or not in a relationship. So that means having your own friends, having your own hobbies, having your own interests outside of the relationship, but then also having the freedom to share those things with your partner when you feel like doing so. And especially in COVID, being stuck in the house with whether it's your family members or a partner or even a roommate, a lot of people felt like they did not have that same independence because they're literally on top of each other and did not have that personal space or that personal room to do those things that they would usually do. Another important element to healthy relationship would be kindness. And we saw a lot of compassion and kindness during this pandemic. I mean, it was very difficult for all of us, but the way that we were able to show kindness to strangers, from the donations that people were giving all across their neighborhoods and across the country, to the salutes that they gave to the frontline workers, even showing just kindness to your local delivery man or local business shop. So those are some of the ways that people were able to show the kindness during the pandemic. But even within the relationship, just making sure that the other person knows that they're appreciated. Maybe if just doing small acts of kindness to just remind them that you care and that you are there for them, right? Whether you are living with them or not, there were still ways that we could express that. And we definitely found ourselves being more intentional about expressing that kindness and showing that kindness to others. Then we have equality, and that essentially is just that there's a feeling of it being balanced in relationship, and no person has more like power, more control or say over what happens within the relationship. It also means that both people are contributing equally, right? So there's not one person that's just like constantly pouring in while the other person is constantly taking, right? Because that's going to be draining and not sustainable for a healthy relationship. So what that looked like in COVID could be sharing household responsibilities, right? Divvying up the chores in a fair and equitable way. If it was a couple not living together, even just friends, having both people reach out to each other to check in, right? It's not always one person that's always sending out that text message or scheduling that Zoom call, right? But there was some equality so that both people were kind of the ones reaching out to one another. We also have support, right? Just finding ways that we can be there. Again, especially during this very difficult time, was huge during the pandemic. And then finally, the trust and honesty that was mentioned in the chat. So we put that together because we really do think it goes hand in hand. In order to feel like you can trust someone, there needs to be open and honest dialogue, right? You can't really trust someone that is being deceitful or lying to you all the time. But on the flip side, in order to feel like you can be open and honest with another person, it's important that there is like an established level of trust, right? So in order for like you can really be vulnerable, there needs to be some trust there. So what that looked like during the pandemic was trusting that your partner or that your friends or that your loved ones weren't going to do anything that could potentially harm you physically, right? That they would practice social distancing and just be mindful of those other things to keep you safe, and just being honest, right? Especially when we are stuck together, it's really easy for us to kind of bottle up our emotions and bottle up our feelings, but it's important that we get that out there and not be afraid to express how we're really feeling so that we can work through that conflict in a healthy way. And like I said, we will discuss how we can communicate in a healthy way when conflict does arise in the relationship.
Mhm. Great, thanks, Nakia. So again, this slide is highlighting elements of healthy relationships or qualities of a healthy relationship. And sometimes we refer to these things as green flags, which we then compare to red flags, which are warning signs that a relationship could be unhealthy. These are signs to us that no, this relationship is healthy and we want to move forward with this relationship. So that's why we have a green flag there. The three elements that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into tonight is going to be boundaries, healthy communication, and empathy. So first, we're going to start by talking about boundaries. So when we ask children what boundaries are in elementary school, they usually come and say like, oh, they're lines or they're limits, right? So I like to think about boundaries as limits that we don't cross. And why boundaries can be so difficult for us to figure out in relationships is there are a few reasons. First is our boundaries are always changing. So my boundaries with one coworker might be different than my boundaries with another coworker, maybe based on my relationship with that coworker. And maybe my boundaries are going to change if I get a promotion, right? And then there are different relationship kind of dynamics within that new role. So our boundaries aren't static. They're always changing depending on lots of different factors. So that's what makes boundaries kind of difficult to navigate often. And it's also difficult because for most boundaries, we can't see them. Right? So we usually can see if we cross a boundary by someone's nonverbal communication, if they're uncomfortable, but most of the time we can't see them. And that's what makes communication so important, is because we need to communicate our boundaries and communicate and ask about other people's boundaries as well. Now, there are 5 different types of boundaries that we like to talk about. The first one we'll talk about is personal space. And this is probably what first came to mind when we said we're going to talk about boundaries, is our personal space boundaries or our bubble. That's how we talk to children about it, right? Our bubble around our body. It's the boundaries we have with our body, excuse me. We then have physical boundaries as well, which are different from personal space boundaries in that they don't always have to do with our body. So a physical boundary can be a fence around a house. It can be a sign on the door that says keep out. Those are boundaries that are typically easier to see. We then have emotional boundaries. So these are boundaries around our emotions or boundaries around what we feel comfortable sharing with folks. So that coworker example, I might have different emotional boundaries with different coworkers of what I feel like sharing with them. We also might have emotional boundaries around the words that we use and the things that we say. So maybe someone has a boundary of there's no body shaming in this house, right? Or this is a no negative self-talk zone. That would be a boundary kind of around our emotions. Then we have time boundaries, so how we use our time. And then we have boundaries around our possessions, so boundaries with our objects. Okay, so we have different types of boundaries. And again, our boundaries are always changing, and that's why we have to communicate them. So we're going to do an activity to help us think through maybe some boundaries that we have. So how this activity is going to go is I am going to ask you a few questions. It's easiest if you jot down your answers, and then if you feel comfortable, you can share with the group afterwards. So I will just give you a second to pull out a piece of paper, open up the notes app on your phone, and then I will ask a few questions of you. And then again, if you're comfortable, we can share with the group. Okay. So this activity is specifically around possessions that we have. So we're going to get started. So I want you all to think about a boundary that you have with a possession. And this possession is one that has great value to you and it's important to you. It could have great monetary value and be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. So I want you to pick a possession in your life that has great value and importance to you. This could be something like an antique or something that's sentimental, or it could be something expensive like a car or technology. So we are going to think about and pick that one possession that we have. Now I want you to write down the different boundaries that you have around that possession with different people in your life. So that possession that's of great value to you, who can use that, right? What are the boundaries that you have with that possession? So you can jot down the boundaries with that possession that's of great value to you. And then I want you to think through when, if you ever have, communicated those boundaries to others. Okay, so now you've identified your boundary around who has access to this object or who can use it. And then have you ever communicated that boundary to others? And what did that communication look like? And then finally, have your boundaries with this possession, have they been crossed, and what did you do if that did happen? So again, has someone crossed your boundary with this special possession? Okay, I'm wondering if anyone would like to unmute or to put in the chat, it might be a lot to put in the chat, what object or possession they chose and what they kind of thought about the activity and what came to mind. So we can give you a second to unmute yourself. Does anyone want to share? It's okay if we have a quieter group tonight. Nikia, would you be able to share?
I sure can. So the possession that I was thinking about was my car. And that is definitely something that I hold near and dear. I think the boundaries that I probably set around it, you definitely have to be licensed and have your own insurance, that's for sure. And I only limit it to, my close family members that I would feel comfortable letting them drive besides myself. And I don't know if my boundary has ever been fully crossed. I have not, thankfully, had anyone attempt to just use my car or just try to, ask to use my car outside of that like close personal bubble. But I'm sure I would be able to express myself and say, no, I don't feel comfortable, but we can come up with other ways for you to get a ride or for you to get to where you're going.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for sharing. And so typically with this activity, a lot of the times people say, I actually haven't communicated any boundary around this really special, important possession in my life. And that we only really communicate once that boundary's been crossed, right? So it's really interesting to think about if this is something that has a lot of value to us, then we should maybe want to try and communicate that. Other people often say like their wedding ring or their wedding bands, and they haven't really had conversations in their house about who can wear it if it's on the sink, right? So we have our own boundaries, even if we don't use the language of a boundary. Almost everyone has boundaries around their possessions, their time, their personal space. So it's helpful for us to have that self-awareness of what are my boundaries and how can I communicate those to others. Now, how have boundaries changed with COVID-19? And I think why this is so difficult with boundaries is it seems like every day guidance and information is changing around COVID, right? So my boundary last week might be very different than this week based on new information I have about mitigation strategies and how to keep myself safe, right? So our boundaries are constantly changing. So our boundaries around wearing masks. This is really interesting as many people are vaccinated now and we're getting out into society. People have very different comfort levels of when to wear masks, when they don't, inside, outside, number of people, right? And so we have to really think through what is my boundary, and also really figuring that out prior to those situations, right? Because once you're in those situations, a lot of the time we're self-conscious. What are other people doing? Basing our decisions on how other people are presenting their boundaries. So our personal space boundaries have really changed during COVID, and we've become like hyper aware of them. With physical boundaries, households working and going to work remotely with limited shared physical space. So we might have different physical space boundaries in our house now. So maybe designated office space. We have emotional boundaries. So a lot of people were talking about how overwhelming it was, all the information and doom scrolling and constantly watching the news, right? So people really were trying to implement emotional boundaries about how much COVID specific content and media they were taking in. We have different time boundaries now because of COVID, and what does it look like when we're working remotely, and where do we stop the clock and punch out for the day with work. And we also saw changes in possessions, maybe in communal spaces, at our offices, not sharing of personal items without wiping them down. And so really, COVID has changed our boundaries quite a bit and has forced us to have more conversations in our life with those we're in relationships with about what our different types of boundaries are. So what do boundaries sound like? So a boundary could sound like, you seem upset. Do you want a hug? Would that make you feel better? This is a boundary. This is us asking about a boundary if we're unsure. So the person is asking if the other individual wants a hug and asking before they cross that personal space boundary, right? So that's what asking someone else's boundary might sound like. The second one is, I know we are just playing around, but I don't like people putting their hands on me like that. Don't push me again. That is asserting a boundary when a boundary has already been crossed, right? When we're asserting our boundaries, we shouldn't be mean, but we can be firm, right? And assertive of what happened and that we didn't like it and what we want to happen in the future. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then finally, the third one is, I want to do something different tonight and not watch Netflix. Maybe we can go for a walk instead. So this is communicating a boundary and also offering an alternative. This is a really helpful thing to integrate when we're talking about boundaries, is when we are setting our limit and telling other people, and they might not like that boundary, it's offering another alternative and another way to engage, whether that is instead of a hug, I'm going to do a fist pump, right? That's an alternative way to engage with them. So when we are saying what our boundaries are, or someone's asking and we're saying no, let's offer an alternative. And then when talking about boundaries, we also have to talk about consent or getting permission to cross a boundary. And that's what we do is we ask about someone's boundaries because, again, most of the time we can't see them. So there are a few things to keep in mind when we're getting permission to cross someone's boundary. When someone's agreeing or giving us permission, it needs to be active. So that means that they are actually telling us this. We aren't assuming what their boundaries are, okay? We also have to give them a choice. So people need to willingly give us permission to cross their boundary, and they shouldn't be coerced. And then finally, there has to be equal power. And so we want there not to be an imbalance of power. However, we do know some relationships, there is an imbalance of power, right? Parent, child. So we're not necessarily talking about that specifically, but we want there to be equal power in terms of no one being incapacitated, under the influence, some of those things, differences in age, that would be an imbalance of power. So again, with boundaries, we always have to communicate them so others don't assume them, and we have to ask when we are unsure, specifically during COVID, since our boundaries are always changing. Any questions about boundaries before we move on? Okay, then we are going to have Nakia take it from here.
All right, thank you. So now I just wanted to give us a chance to practice a little bit and understand what asserting our boundaries or asking people about their boundaries would actually sound like. So I'll just read a scenario, and if you wanted to unmute yourself or type in the chat what you would say in that situation if you were setting a boundary, and then we can just go from there. So the first one is your coworker keeps sending you emails late into the evening and gets upset if you don't respond right away. How could you establish a boundary regarding your time?
So again, you can either type this in the chat or you can unmute yourself to let us know how you would let them know about your boundaries. We are practicing asserting our boundaries. Would you like me to go, Nakia, about how I might?
Sure.
Okay, great. So I think how I would respond would say, I just want to let you know that I've decided to not respond to emails after work hours. So you can send them, but I would appreciate if you don't expect a response right away.
Great. Thank you. And then Suzanne, thank you also, or Susan also wrote in the chat, I would say something along the lines pretty similar to what you said, Anne, of, hey, thanks for reaching out. I'm generally available between the hours of X and Y. And that is another great way that you can assert that boundary. Thank you for sharing that one. We'll do another one in terms of the practicing social distancing. So your friend wants to come over for a visit, but you notice on social media that they haven't been practicing social distancing. How would you set a boundary? Especially if you were practicing social distancing and you no longer felt comfortable hanging out, how could you make that known?
This is difficult because you don't want people to feel badly about their actions, but you also want to let them know how you are feeling so you can make a plan that works for everyone. Right. And I think people kind of also are kind of sensitive about the judgment of others and how they're navigating COVID. So this is difficult. What do we think? Nakia, do you want to give it a try?
Well, Anita said, tell our friend that we are not hosting anyone at the moment, but happy to Zoom meet with social hour. Thank you. I was actually going to say something very similar. Thank you, Anita. I would offer an alternative to say, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable with having visitors at the house at the moment, but I'd be happy to hop on a Zoom call or maybe meet in a park or something where there's lots of open air, and I would feel a little bit more comfortable sharing with them. Thank you. And then someone else wrote something along the lines of, I am playing it safe these days, so it'd be great to meet outdoors or on Zoom. Excellent, thank you. All right, so I think for the sake of time, we will skip these last two for now and move on to the next section.
Great.
Okay.
You
Yep,
good,
go ahead.
Nikki? No, go for it.
So now we'll talk a little bit about healthy communication, right? Because we know that is the key to be able to express ourselves, our wants, our needs, with the other person. So it's really important that we are able to share that in a way that the other person can receive it. So some ways that we can communicate in a relationship is by actively listening. And then you think, well, if I'm communicating, like, why would I need to actively listen? But we want to make sure that the other person is actually engaged in the conversation as they are speaking, paraphrasing back what they just said, to making sure that you understand. So maybe saying like, oh, I heard you say X, Y, and Z, is that correct, right? You could also ask follow-up questions. And then if you are responding to what they're saying, you want to make sure that you're pausing and being considerate of what you are going to say to them. And also, we want to make sure that we are leading with empathy and making sure that we are checking our tone and not coming off too harsh.
Nikia, just an FYI, you were cutting out a little bit, so I'm not sure if you want to.
You could, yes, if you could do that, then
I can do this. Yeah. So we are going to watch a video by Brene Brown. And I really like this video because it talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think a lot of times our natural reaction to someone telling us information that might not be great is to be sympathetic when we really want to be empathetic. And Brene just does a wonderful job of talking about this in a really relatable way. So we're going to watch this and then we can talk a little bit more about empathy.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had a, yeah, and we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. So there are a few key things from that video that really stick out to me is talking about the difference between empathy driving connection and sympathy driving disconnection. And also that imagery of having the individual come down and be on the same level with that person versus looking down from the top, right? So with empathy, taking on someone's perspective, we've heard someone say, you know, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, just imagining how they are feeling, right, and their emotions. And then staying away from judgment, right, which Brene says, you know, we love to do, right? But trying to not pass judgment, being supportive, validating their feelings, and recognizing that your response isn't going to really change the outcome, but your response will make them feel supported and heard. Now, Nakia, is there something in the chat?
They just said, what a great video on empathy. And someone else said, I agree.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I really like that video. I think it really kind of gets to the point and really does show. And also, I think a lot of us do that at least thing, thinking we're being helpful. But a lot of the times people just want to be heard and validated. And they don't even always want advice. And as humans, we often want to give advice. We want to fix it. And what's really helpful is to say, do you want me just to listen right now, or do you want me to help to try to fix it or help solve your problem? I've said that to many people before, right? Of just checking in and communicating. What do you want from me right now? I can just listen and support you, or I can help try and fix it. So let me look at the time. We are actually not going to practice our empathy statements, but just for you to think about the next time someone says something to you that might be painful or that they're going through a hard time, think through, how can I be empathetic right now and not sympathetic? How can I take on their perspective and validate what they're feeling without trying to fix the problem? And then finally, we're going to wrap up by talking about healthy communication during conflict. So we started by talking about healthy communication in general, with active listening, paraphrasing, showing empathy. All those things are great. We can also do those during conflict. There's some other skills that we can use if we're in conflict. Now, it's really important to remember that conflict is normal and often is inevitable. And in fact, conflict can be healthy if we resolve it in a healthy way. So relationships that have no conflict in them whatsoever might actually be unhealthy. Because if there's no conflict in a relationship, it often means that the two individuals involved aren't openly communicating, right? Maybe it doesn't feel safe to openly communicate. Maybe they don't think the other person's going to actually listen to them and be an active listener. So we find the lack of conflict often is an indicator of an unhealthy relationship. Okay, so conflict. First, where we want to start is having self-awareness that we're in conflict. Self-awareness of how we are feeling, like how are we feeling about what's happening right now? Why do we think we're feeling that way? Making sure we're calm enough to have healthy communication, right? And go into it with a level head. So we first want to start with that self-awareness. And then we want to use an I statement. An I statement starts with I and focuses on our feelings. This is really helpful in a conflict because we're making it about ourselves and our feelings instead of pointing the finger at someone and saying, you did this, you're doing that, what you're doing is not okay. We're making it about our feelings so the individual is less likely to get defensive and more likely to hear what we're saying. So an I statement starts with I feel, and we state our feelings and when we feel that way based on maybe a behavior they're doing and what we would like them to do. This is probably the most important part. We don't just want to say like, I'm feeling really frustrated when you continually don't put dishes in the dishwasher. Don't do that again. Instead of saying don't do that, we want to say what we actually want people to do, right? So is it that you want them to rinse the dishes right away and put them in? Is it okay for them to stay there and at the end of the night before bed they put them away? No, so instead of saying don't do this, we want to say, well, please do this instead. That's really helpful. Some other things to keep in mind around healthy communication during conflict is giving people space that they need so they can be calm coming into these conversations. But note that giving someone space is different than giving someone the silent treatment. So the silent treatment is when a person doesn't talk to another person and they're doing that to have control in the relationship. They're doing that to make that person feel bad or concerned. And the other person isn't sure why they're not speaking to them or not talking to them or hanging out with them, right? That's very different than someone communicating that they need space. And if we do need space, we want to communicate like, I need a day, or I'll get back to you in 2 days, right? And what that timeline looks like. We also want to fully forgive people and not hold that over their head, right? This is a really important piece of this is we can't always live in the past. So we need to forgive people and not always have that in the back of our mind. On the flip side of that, we also want people to give genuine apologies when they make mistakes. So we are going to make mistakes in our relationships. No one is perfect, right? But we need to apologize for those mistakes and then change our behavior moving forward. We want to take responsibility when we make mistakes. We have to be willing to compromise because there are two people in any kind of relationship, right? So both need to come to compromise and recognize that we don't have to agree with someone, but we can still respect them, right? So again, communication is super important, especially during conflicts, and conflict is not always bad. It often can be an opportunity to learn more about this individual that you're in a relationship with and make a plan about how you guys want to interact moving forward. Nakia, you want to wrap us up?
Sure can. All right. So just in conclusion, we want you all to keep in mind and remember that healthy relationships feel safe, that you feel safe both physically and emotionally, right? That you can be yourself and you can feel comfortable around that person. It's also important to keep in mind that they're fun. You should enjoy spending time with the other person, whether it is a friend or family member or a significant other, right? And they're good. They bring out the best in us, right? We want to make sure that people are pouring into us and bringing out our best selves. And not, kind of revealing the uglier, darker side. And also we want people to keep in mind that even if your relationship isn't perfect right now, or it's never too late or too early to think through ways that you can make your relationship healthier. So that's why we wanted to start off our series talking about what healthy relationships look like and all the different elements, so that this can be an ongoing practice that we implement in our lives. And just remember that relationships can change and they grow over time. So be gentle on ourselves and be empathetic, right? And give ourselves grace that there's always room to grow and improve. So with that, it is 7 o'clock right now. So we just wanted to see if anyone had any questions about anything. Again, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself.
I just want to thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, while we're waiting for some questions, a reminder that we will be here every Wednesday in October. And next week, we will be talking about red flags and spotting unhealthy behaviors in relationships. And this is a really great next step because we will spend a lot of time comparing and contrasting our red flags to some of the green flags that we talked about today. And when we're talking about unhealthy behaviors, when we understand what healthy are, they really are easier to understand and pinpoint why they might be unhealthy. So we look forward to seeing people next week. And Nakia, are there any other questions in the chat box?
Nope, just saying thank you. It's very helpful
Okay.
and learned a lot. Yes, thank you all. And thank you all for your participation today.
And thank you both for taking the time to be here, be very personable, and make some things that may be a little hard to digest or to understand, understandable. And that video was just everything. It was awesome.
Great.
All right, well, we will see you all next week, hopefully.
All right, thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.